Robbie Robertson often said there was one fellow musician he could never warm to, Paul McCartney. For a man who spent decades side by side with icons like Bob Dylan, Eric Clapton, and Neil Young, it was striking that McCartney, one of the world's most beloved Beatles, was the one he admitted to hating more than anyone. To understand where that bitterness came from, you first have to understand Robertson's journey, from the roots of his childhood to the towering legacy he left behind. Robbie Robertson was born Jaime Royal Robertson on July 5, 1943, in Toronto, Canada. His life began in a household marked by two very different cultures. His mother came from Mohawk and Cayuga ancestry and was raised on the Six Nations Reserve in Ontario. His father, a Jewish immigrant with Eastern European roots, passed away before Robbie was old enough to remember him. This mix of indigenous storytelling traditions and Jewish heritage shaped Robertson's perspective in ways that would echo through his music. By the time he picked up a guitar, he wasn't just learning an instrument, he was blending histories, weaving rhythms and melodies that carried the weight of both cultures. As a teenager, Robertson was already playing in local bands across Toronto. Older musicians were astonished at his technical skill and his natural instinct for songwriting. His first big leap came when he joined Ronnie Hawkins and the Hawks, a hard-driving rockabilly band. Touring across North America gave Robertson his first taste of the grueling life of a professional musician. But it also introduced him to the men who would become his creative brothers, Levon Helm, Rick Danko, Richard Manuel, and Garth Hudson. By the mid-1960s, the Hawks were restless. They eventually split from Hawkins and rebranded themselves simply as The Band, a modest name for a group that would change rock forever. Their debut album, Music from Big Pink, released in 1968, was unlike anything of its time. While psychedelic rock dominated the charts, Robertson and his bandmates turned to something earthier: Americana, folk, country, gospel, and blues. Recorded in a pink house in upstate New York, the songs carried a raw honesty that floored both critics and musicians. Tracks like The Weight and Chest Fever sounded timeless, as though they had been part of American folklore all along. Robertson, though Canadian, became the band's primary songwriter. His lyrics painted vivid portraits of Southern farmers, drifters, Civil War soldiers, and everyday people carrying the burdens of life. Classics like The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down, Up on Cripple Creek, and It Makes No Difference remain some of the most evocative pieces in rock history. His guitar playing, sharp, subtle, and purposeful, never overshadowed the songs. It served the story, lifting the music without ego. The band also carved history when they backed Bob Dylan during his controversial 1965-1966 Electric Tour. Folk purists booed Dylan's new sound, but Robertson and his band stood firm. For them, the music was about truth, not appeasement. By 1976, years of relentless touring, internal conflicts, and drug abuse had taken their toll. Robertson pushed for the band to retire from the road. Their farewell came on Thanksgiving Day at the Winterland Ballroom in San Francisco. That night became the Last Waltz, a monumental concert that Robertson largely envisioned. With Martin Scorsese directing, the band welcomed a parade of musical legends: Dylan, Joni Mitchell, Neil Young, Eric Clapton, Van Morrison, and many more. The performance was immortalized in Scorsese's film, also titled The Last Waltz. Today, it stands as one of the greatest concert documentaries of all time, a communal send-off, and Robertson's way of preserving music as living history. After the band ended, Robertson struck out on his own. His 1987 self-titled solo album fused rock with cinematic soundscapes, featuring contributions from Peter Gabriel and members of U2. In later years, he leaned into his indigenous roots. Albums like Contact from the Underworld of Red Boy, 1998, blended chants and native voices with contemporary production, bridging traditional culture with modern music. At the same time, his friendship with Martin Scorsese grew into a legendary creative partnership. Robertson contributed music to films like Raging Bull, The King of Comedy, Casino, Gangs of New York, The Wolf of Wall Street, and The Irishman. His gift for weaving sound into story made him one of the most respected figures in film music. In 2016, Robertson shared his own story in his memoir, Testimony, where he reflected on his childhood, his career, and the turbulent but unforgettable years with the band. Readers were struck by its warmth, humor, and honesty, away from the spotlight. Robertson's personal life gave him grounding. On March 24, 1968, he married Dominique Bourgeois, a Canadian journalist from an intellectual family. Their partnership gave him stability during the band's most chaotic years. Together, they raised 3 children, including a son, Sebastian, who followed his father into creative pursuits. Their marriage had its struggles. In 1977, Dominique filed for divorce, but the two reconciled, remaining married until 2003. Robertson often said his children gave him perspective that fame never could. Much later, Robertson found love again. On March 12, 2023, only months before his passing, he married Janet Zuccarini, a Canadian entrepreneur and judge on Top Chef Canada. Their late-in-life marriage reflected his enduring belief in connection, even as illness began to weigh on him. For all the collaborations and friendships Robertson built, one relationship always stuck out as fractured: his feelings toward Paul McCartney. He admired the Beatles' place in history, but McCartney himself left Robertson cold. "Paul always struck me as someone who had to be the center of attention," Robertson once remarked. To him, McCartney's polished melodies felt too safe, too perfect, almost artificial. By contrast, Robertson revered Dylan's fearlessness. Dylan risked everything. Paul wanted it all tidy and clean. At industry events in the 1970s and 1980s, Robertson remembered feeling brushed aside by McCartney, who dominated conversations with Beatles anecdotes. He spoke warmly of George Harrison's spirituality, admired John Lennon's brutal honesty, and found Ringo Starr refreshingly grounded. But McCartney? He was the only one Robertson admitted he couldn't stomach. Even later in life, his stance barely softened. He acknowledged McCartney's brilliance as a songwriter, but insisted that respect and affection were two very different things. When asked which famous musician he disliked most, Robertson didn't hesitate. Paul. Always Paul. On August 9, 2023, Robbie Robertson died in Los Angeles at the age of 80. After a year-long battle with prostate cancer, those close to him said he faced his illness with quiet dignity, never losing his creative spark. Even in his final months, he spoke of unfinished musical ideas and the enduring power of storytelling through song. Robertson left behind more than records, films, and books. He left a legacy built on resilience, artistry, and truth. From a boy with patched shoes on the Six Nations Reserve to a man who reshaped rock music and left his fingerprints on cinema, his life was proof of the power of reinvention. And through it all, friendships, rivalries, triumphs, and failures, Robbie Robertson never lost his voice. A voice that told stories of heartbreak and hope, of survival and spirit, and of the messy, beautiful truth of being human.